Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this Thursday evening for another one of our online tastings. For those of you for whom this is your first event, my name is Mark. I'm the head buyer for United Cellars, and I have taken great pleasure in running these online events. Very pleased with how they are going, and pleased that we're able to get ourselves into your living room, into the comfort of your own home. I'd like to introduce my co-host here, Luke Baldwin.
Hello.
I'd also like to introduce our far-flung compatriot, Alistair Cooper, calling in from the UK.
Hello, everybody.
He's enjoying coffee while we enjoy our Bannockburn.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the wine, so it's coffee for me today. But I'm
coffee only. That's
very
all right.
interested to hear.
Ali is a master of wine, and so he will have. I'm sure he will have some interesting input into the more geeky side of things. I might say, Ali, if that's all right.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, of course.
And of course, we have Matt Holmes, who is the winemaker at Bannockburn, joining us this evening. So how are you, Matt?
I'm well, Mark, thank you, and thanks for the invitation.
Absolute pleasure. So I would encourage everyone, if possible, as we sent out in the email this morning or earlier this afternoon, I would encourage you all to have 3 glasses poured with each of the wines poured. I sincerely hope you had your wines you've got them out of the fridge already. If you haven't, please do pull them out of the fridge. These wines are definitely, I pulled them out about half an hour ago. The temperature, the way it is currently in Sydney, is definitely cellar temperature, as we'd say. And they need to get up to that temperature. These wines are much, much more expressive, I'm finding, with a little bit of warmth. If you have just pulled them out of the fridge, I'd encourage you to give them a little bit of a warm up with your hands, because they're looking a little bit more expressive that way. So if you can, please have your 3 wines out in front of you poured. The first one we'll be trying this evening that Matt will be talking about is the Chardonnay, the Blend Chardonnay. Then we'll move on to the second one, which is the SRH Chardonnay, and we'll finish with the Pinot Noir. So if you do have the 3 glasses out, please pour them. Go by all means. If you've just got the one, just pour the first Chardonnay, please. So we're just going to move on first to our first slide for the evening, and I'm just going to pass over to Luke to give us the basics of this.
Evening, everybody. Great to have you here. Obviously, we want tastings to be as interactive and engaging as possible, so we really welcome questions. So you can either unmute your microphone, or we've got a comments section. Feel free to type in your comment or your question. I can pick up on it and put it to Matt or Ali or Mark or whoever you'd like it asked to. So, we want people to be asking questions as much as possible. If social media is your thing, as you can see on the bottom there, we've got the @United Cellars Instagram and Facebook. So please engage. We're live streaming at the moment, so that's exciting times into the 21st century. And also, as you can see on the screen, we've got, if people have come to tastings before, we've got an opportunity to win your favorite wine. So all you need to do is text into the number on the screen, your name, your email, and your favorite wine of the night. The codes are just there. And at the end of the night, we'll spin the wheel of wine, and you've got your chance to win it. So good luck with that one as well.
Thank you very much, Luke, and good luck, everyone. We do encourage you to let us know which one was your favourite. We do very much value that feedback, and it's always a great opportunity for someone to win a bottle this evening. So we unfortunately can't give you the bottle to take home with you, as you're already at home, but we will definitely be able to get you the bottle, no problems at all. So we're going to move across to Matt now. And Matt's going to give us an introduction to his history, as well as the history of Bannockburn, as we enjoy our first glass of Chardonnay. So Matt, I'm just going to throw it over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Mark. Hello to everybody, and once again, thank you for joining us. I often find at these kind of things that somebody has a really interesting experience of Bannockburn. We've been around for a long time, longer than I've been around, actually, and so I'm going to give a little bit of history, but I'm sure that there's some people out there that have some experience that with Bannockburn at some point in their lives that is outside of the basics of the history. I'd love to hear from you if we do get a chance. But we're a family-owned business. We've been out at Bannockburn, which is actually a town as well as the name of our business, since 1974. Stuart Hooper, after whom the second wine is named. So it's SRH, is Stuart Reginald Hooper. Started the business and came from a background of grocery in rural Victoria. The story goes that his two daughters were bribed with ice cream for a drive around the countryside, looking for sites for a vineyard on many weekends of their adolescence and younger lives, and ultimately they settled on this site quite close to where they lived, which was Geelong. So Stuart Hooper, uncommonly at the time, was a real red wine, table wine fan, as opposed to fortified wines. That was not his thing at all. And so he was a great drinker of DRC, which who knows what that went for at the time, but
it probably was, $4 or $5 at the time.
That's right, yeah, and would have seemed steep at that. But that was his reference point, and that was one of the few, I suppose, that came to Australia. But for whatever reason, and unfortunately, I never got a chance to talk to him about it. He passed away in the late 1990s, but that really got his attention, and that was what we were trying to recreate. And so, in the early days, we planted a Shiraz vineyard, but in 1976, Pannell and Chardonnay. That's been our focus, I would say, ever since then. We built a winery in 1981. Gary Farr was our first winemaker and winemaker for 25 years. As I said, Stuart passed away, so it's his two daughters I work for these days. But for that whole time, we've grown our own grapes. We've made our own wine in that winery that's out there. Not that entire time. There are a couple of wines from the 1970s that I assume were made in a garage or something. But by and large, we've been an estate business for all of that time. We've had 3 winemakers. I'm lucky enough to be the third. And so, Pinot Chardonnay, we make Shiraz, of course, some Sauvignon Blanc and some Riesling. We've got a little bit of Cabernet and Merlot too.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to show a little, thank you very much for that, Matt. I'm just going to, first of all, go to just a very broad and not informative map of where we are in the world. So here we are in Geelong. This is obviously a relatively large region, as a lot of the regions within Victoria and the whole of Australia are. They tend to be quite all-encompassing. Very dissimilar to the wines that Matt was talking about there, the wines of DRC, the Domaine de la Romanée Conti from Burgundy, where everything seems to be, every row almost is classified for its quality. So I'm now going to throw over to Luke. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and throw it to Luke, who's going to show us a little bit closer of closer into the Geelong, the Bannockburn region.
Yeah, brilliant. So let's just move in. So I think, Matt, you can probably take it from there.
Yeah, we had a drone out for our website redevelopment some years ago, and you think you know a property and then you see it, from above. It still sort of slows me down when I see that aerial shot. But we're located on the broadly the northeast side of that highway, which is the left-hand side of the picture there. The town of Bannockburn that I mentioned is everything on the other side. So the subdivision is restricted to that side of the highway. The highway ultimately goes out to Ballarat from Geelong. So it's called the Ballarat Road, as a lot of the roads are down here. The destination is the name of the road, but that's the Midland Highway. I'm not sure what time of year this photo was taken, but I'm going to guess it's in summer. You can see just how limited the greenery is. I can see there's a broccoli farm on the right-hand side of the image. They do a lot of irrigation. That's right through there. And then by and large, the rest of it is very brown.
It doesn't look exactly lush, does it?
It's not. And in fact, on top of that, you can sort of see that there's a lack of trees. There's trees down various roadways, which, sort of is just a habit. There's trees as windbreaks around houses, but naturally there's not a lot of trees out there. There's simply not enough rainfall. And so it is quite an arid environment. Around us, mostly is sheep farming. There's a lot of cropping from barley, peas and some other rotations, but water is a bit of a limitation. And so you certainly don't see dairy farming around us, for example.
And as we're focusing on Chardonnay number 1, let's just have a quick zoom in and focus on the Chardonnay block. Perhaps you can go from there.
Yes, this is overhead the Chardonnay block. If you've had Bannockburn Chardonnay, you've had a wine that on average would be 50% made from that block there. The spirit of our estate wines is that they are a blend of all of our vineyards and all of our, the relevant vineyards. So there's this winery block, as we would call it. We make SRH, but the barrels of SRH that don't make it into SRH would find their way into this blend as well. And then there's several other Chardonnay vineyards, including that newer one on the other side of the tree line there, which we call Kelly Lane, which looks slightly greener there in that picture for whatever reason. But that is a 1978 planting of Chardonnay. I think the image is actually aligned north-south right now. It's close to, it might be slightly off that, but the old-fashioned way to plant things was that the rows would be aligned north-south. If we were zooming in, we'd see that the width between the rows is 3 meters, which is what the width of the tractors were back in the day in order to have sufficient horsepower to pull the sprayers and the implements. And so that's a mainstay of our Bannockburn Chardonnay, has been for a long time and will be for a long time, I'd like to think too. So the soil, by and large, we've got a varying amount of topsoil over the top of limestone. Where the Chardonnay block icon is positioned is actually where the topsoil starts to diminish, funnily enough, but there's clay over the top of limestone clays. We find that in that spacing that you get in that Chardonnay block, we've got, as I mentioned, 3 meters between the rows. The spacing between the vines is about 2 meters. And so they're relatively low density. We'll find our way over to some high density blocks shortly, but there's a fair amount of wire that each vine needs to inhabit. And so it tends to be that the canopy is quite thin. We get pretty good exposure of the bunches to the weather. And so despite the fact that we're in a very cool climate, we do tend to have quite rich Chardonnays routinely. In some years we'll have a little bit of sunburn and those berries tend to split. In some years those split berries go on to form a little bit of botrytis, which adds a little extra power, often in wetter years as well. So that's the backbone of the first wine for tonight.
Interesting. So if I could jump in for a second there, Matt. So one thing that I'm getting, and I'd be keen to hear all of your feedback as well. I can definitely get that kind of, as soon as you said limestone as a subsoil, that immediately kind of brought to mind for me that's where that acidity comes from. That's where that line of citrus I get in this wine. I get a lot of grapefruit. It's not overtly big, round. It's not kind of Margaret River Chardonnay by any stretch of the imagination. There is definitely, I can see that sunshine ripeness, but it really is a citrus grapefruit line of fruit within this wine that I get, and that limestone I think might have something to might play a role in that, I would think. Yeah,
and this is a fairly, we're not in the weeds. We don't have a lot of weeds out there, but this is a fairly technical thing and a fairly obscure thing to be talking about the influence of something that, by and large, you can't see upon a wine. But yeah, the limestone to me, yeah, Margaret River is a good example. It's sort of 200 kilometres further north and is warmer, but they have heft where we have power, and so the acid is one of the things that keeps that power balanced. And so if we had an opportunity, if we had an old 50-metre swimming pool that we could fill with sand and grow things side by side just to see exactly what that limestone contributes to the wine, I think that your point would be proven. And so I'm looking for a second-hand 50-metre swimming pool if anyone's got one on free or whatever.
Now, I think we had a question that someone's put in here.
Okay.
So Ian has asked, were there many vineyards in Geelong at the time Bannockburn was founded?
There were 4 or 5. There was at least one from the 1960s, and then mostly smaller vineyards that a couple of which have maintained a contribution to the region as well. So yeah, we would be 4th or 5th. As far as commercial wineries go, which is sort of a different question, we'd probably be 2nd or 3rd. But it was a relatively sort of lightly populated region. There is a history actually there that goes back to the gold rush of the 1840s and the 1850s. So that Midland Highway you see there as the paved road was the thoroughfare from Geelong, which is the port, to Ballarat, which is where the gold mines were. So at some point in time, there were horses and carts and buggies going up there for people following their dream and hoping to strike it rich. But at that same time, people from Europe brought their culture of growing grapes and making wine. It's not a business; it's a culture, I think, at its heart. And so the Swiss people, in particular, in Geelong, started growing grapes in the 1840s, 1850s. And the sad part of this story is that's where phylloxera came into Australia. And so, it's because it was such an important port, because Geelong was such an important port in the world, and because these Swiss people have brought their culture. But there's an old history and there's a more modern history, and we were part of the early second coming of Geelong.
Right, so this was one of the first points of phylloxera coming into Australia, you say?
It was, as they tell the story, this was the first place where phylloxera came to Australia.
Interesting.
Because, louse that exists in the soil, it does quite well in our soils because we have clay. It doesn't do so well in sand. And so it got probably a pretty good foothold when it did arrive in Australia. It's native to Europe and, native to America. And yet American vines are conditioned to it. The European vines obviously were not, and so we are planted on American rootstocks by and large, although that's not completely true. We have quite a lot of unrooted vines as well.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you for that, Matt. So now we're going to move on to the SRH. Any thoughts on a few hands up here I can see in the video? Any thoughts? Oh, we got the SRH getting that out of the fridge. Very good. Any thoughts on these wines so far? Anything we want to put in? Is anyone completely disagreeing with my grapefruit citrus, or you keen to hear your feedback? And I'll get you to pour your second glass if it hasn't already been done, please. I'm just going to do the same. So SRH, you've already gone into the name. So Luke, would you mind taking us across to where that SRH vineyard is? Beautiful, thank you.
Of course.
Beautiful. So we've got a wine here that's 2 years older. So Alistair's getting coffee notes. Very good, very funny. So we've got a wine that's 2 years older. Now this is of course the current vintage of this wine. So Matt, this is obviously a wine that's meant for aging. You purposefully hold that one back. Is that correct?
Well, this is connected as much to the previous winemaker, who was practicing a really interesting winemaking technique whereby the wine was inside the winery in a 1,300 litre cask for 3 years before bottling. So he worked his way up. Initially, it was sort of the conventional year or year and a half, and then from there he kept pushing it out. And so when I arrived in 2015, we had 2011 extended lease Chardonnay, which was a separate product. 2012 SRH was still in the winery, unsulfured, had gone through malolactic, but sort of stabilised in the winery, and then bottled, which is sort of the back to front way, if you like. Not back to front, it's a bit disrespectful, but it's a lot of people would bottle freshness and then wait for complexity to follow. Michael was bottling stability with the idea, I think, that the wine would be very stable and develop very slowly for a very long time, and that's proven to be true. So, for example, that 2012 SRH will live for a long while. So it's connected to that. When I took over, I thought, okay, well, there's some merit in this idea, and I'm just intrigued by it anyway. So the 2015 was probably 2.5 years in barrel. The 2016 was probably 20 months, and it was only with the 2017 SRH that I bottled it the same day as the estate blend, and that's what we do to this date. And on top of which, rather than putting it in one cask as Michael was doing it, these days I try to make the SRH exactly the same way as the Chardonnay. So it goes through the same amount of malolactic to as much of an extent as I can. I try to put it in the same barrels. And so what you're tasting is simply the difference between one vineyard and the combination of vineyards that we have out there. One of the really sort of interesting ways that this block came to be is that it was just year after year the best block that we had. And it's sort of like if you listen to music through a decent stereo, and it's enjoyable, it's good music, sounds good, you tap your foot. The moment you hear it through a really good stereo, then that's the difference. That's what SRH looks like in the winery. The acid is just more pure, has more heft, is longer, is more serious, but is more fun. It's just a different expression of Chardonnay. So that's our best block, which sounds simple, but a lot of the time, and we are guilty of this, if you like, but you're buying Serre or you're buying Delaterre because it's an experiment in viticulture. SRH is not an experiment at all. It's just every single year the site of our best Chardonnay. And that was true for Gary Farr when he was there, and so he named it after Stuart Hooper. It's been true for me, and I'd hazard a guess and say it was true for Michael Glover as well.
Yeah, that is. I definitely see what you mean. For me, everything's kind of you've taken the elements of the previous wine, and everything's just been kind of tuned up to 11 there. Mm-hmm. The intensity of the fruit, I'm getting a really clear kind of lime cordial note in there, a really concentrated, layered core of fruit in that. The acidity really is a notch higher as well. It's really quite searing.
Yeah. Matt, there's on the chat box here some amazing reviews of the Chardonnay. Chiara said, not many white wines can carry that much power and richness whilst keeping so much freshness and energy. And the team in the room next to me in the UC tasting room, I can hear them loving the wine. So good job.
Well, yeah, no, good job on identifying that block, Gary Farr. Good job on growing it consistently. Great, our vineyard manager Lucas Grigsby.
Absolutely.
There's a little point of difference there. Those rows are slightly different alignment to the other block. They tend to resist the northerly breezes that we occasionally get down there a little better than the other blocks do, which are running, as I say, north-south. This block perhaps has better protection against those hot northerlies, but by and large, like I say, it's the same clone. It was planted 2 years earlier than the winery block. It's the same spacing, it's the same trellis, it's treated the same farm, the same by and large, and yet, as I say, there's no mistaking it inside the winery. 100% malolactic in 2016. I mentioned malolactic earlier. So the 2019 Chardonnay that we had first, 60% of that went through, I think 70% of that went through malolactic. In 2018, it had been 80%. In 2017, it had been 90%. So I was just sort of going down in the extent of malolactic year on year just to see what that brought to the wine. And I liked it every time, and so I just thought I'd take it another step. And as I say, these days the SRH is in lockstep with the greater Chardonnay program, so it goes through malolactic to the same extent. But yeah, we're just backing off on the Chardonnay malolactic, where that 2016 was 100% malolactic.
Mark, it's looking like we might have lost you there.
Sorry, that just cut out for a second there. You guys can hear me all right? Sorry about that. One thing I would say is that there'd be a temptation, I would say, with the intensity that this wine has for a lot of winemakers to really slather on a bit of oak on this one. And I can tell you've left the fruit purity really quite clear there. So this, you're saying that this is left for 3 years in a large oak barrel, and that's the only oak it does see?
By the time we get to this wine, I'm doing a mixture of things. So the majority of it was in a 1,300 litre cask. There was a puncheon of that was new in 2016 that was added to the mix as well. So there is a component of new oak. One of the things I personally like with new oak is for them to be more of a contributor to the structure than they are to the character. So there's some, cooperages out there that make very characterful barrels, and there's other ones that make more structural barrels. So I'm okay with a little bit of character, but primarily I would use new oak to support the acid with a little bit of structure. So that's those cooperages that we use would be less overt in the first place, I think.
Yeah. So that's, I think it's very, very deftly done for balancing that acidity and power very, very nicely. So if you haven't already done it, if you've still got some of the first Chardonnay in your glass, I encourage you to go back and see them side by side. I think you'll very, very clearly see that, like I said, that tune up to the next level with the SRH there. It's really quite clear. There's not that that's disparaging in any way of the Chardonnay. I think there's just a different level of concentration in the SRH there for me. So we may actually we might go back to the if you wouldn't mind throwing back to me, Luke. I'll put my screen back on here. There it is. I'm just going to share my screen again for everyone. So we've talked about the winemakers, which is great. I just wanted to also, and then also we've gone through SRH. We've gone through what that means, which is great. A much more green field in the background of this one rather than our 3D map. And so now we might move on to the Pinot Noir. This is obviously an older bottle shot that we've been using with the cork there. But you guys have been proponents of cork for quite a while, and you were kind of holding out with the cork for a while from memory. Do you still? I know you mentioned before there's still some that you do part under cork, part Stelvin. Is that still the case?
That is true. We do trials regularly as well, just to challenge that. And so there was a bit of a surprise with the Chardonnays from 2017. We did both the Pinot and the Chardonnay in 2017. We used a cork called Diam, which is not a natural cork per se. It's made from natural cork pieces. It's been treated so it does not have cork taint, and then it's recombined. And it's a cork that I've been using for a long time and I have good faith in. So we used their premium cork, which is guaranteed to have 10 years of proper sealing against the inside of the bottle. The Chardonnay was the opposite to the Pinot in our finding. So most people preferred the cork for the Chardonnay. That was 2017. The screw cap showed just a touch, less engaging. But the second day, the screw cap had sort of gone past the cork. In the Pinot, it was both day one and day two. It was Pinot under screw cap, was just showing a bit more liveliness and a bit more vitality. And so that was the result, I must say, I expected for both wines. But the Chardonnay, it was a good challenge to our assumptions that the screw cap wasn't the most favoured. But we did turn over to screw cap in a large part in 2010. We do our magnums under cork. We do some wine for the UK and the US under cork as required.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's really the reason that we persist with it. It's a screw cap's not perfect. If it gets damaged physically, of course, then it is compromised straight away, or potentially compromised straight away. But I remember, if I go back to doing tastings 20 years ago, if you did a tasting for sort of 50 people, there'd be sort of 6 bottles of wine that you'd have to send out to the crowd. You'd have to arrive half an hour early. You try each one of those 6 bottles. There's 4 that taste very similar to each other. There's 2 that are a little bit different. Maybe one of them's corked and you have to reject it. But then you'd send it out to the room, and you were talking to a couple of different wines that people were experiencing, and so it was a bit frustrating. These days, if I get to a tasting, and we're doing it right now, we've all got a wine under a screw cap. I've got great faith that that has held them in the very same condition that each other person is tasting it tonight. And so I arrive 5 minutes before the event, if you want, and I don't taste the wines before they go out there, and I have I've really great faith that each person is trying the same wine. So I've had great wines under cork, as we all have. And I've also had less good experiences. So it's a tough one. But yeah, we've just decided that the greater good is with screw cap. We do challenge it, like I say, and we do use a very good company to apply them.
Yeah, I must share a quick story from my own personal experience. I was hosting a dinner at a restaurant. This was last year, obviously pre-COVID, and it was with a group of younger people, so kind of mid-20s, who had kind of grown up their entire adult life with the Stelvin cap as the absolute norm. And we had an Italian wine, and I had 2 bottles, and one of the bottles was corked, and it was quite clearly corked. And I actually used it as an example for people, and got them with a glass that I knew that they weren't going to be using again. And I poured them a corked wine and said to them, "This is what corked wine is," and then put it next to the wine that wasn't corked, and said, have a look at the differences between these, because it was so rare for these young people to see what corked wine was, to taste what corked wine was. They didn't have the foggiest what it actually tasted like. So that was quite an interesting learning experience for me as well. We're so used to having this consistency, and it is. I mean, we are blessed by it. It's fantastic, but it's always interesting to go back and remind ourselves of what the old days used to be like, so to speak. So yeah. So anyway, I do diverge. We're onto the Pinot now, and I must be honest, Matt. This wine, your Bannockburn Pinot in general, is a wine that makes me do my happy dance. This is a very, very, very nice wine. This is a sexy wine. Luke, I'm going to throw back to you, mate, and we're gonna go to the map again, and we're going to have a look at where we are in the world in comparison to the Bannockburn vineyards.
Just whilst that all loads up, a few nice comments. Ali, I think you messaged me asking to just add a comment to the Pinot if you could. I'll just unmute you if you want. Are you there, Ali? No?
Still on mute.
I'm on mute. How about
There we
now?
go. There we go.
Yeah, I've got to say, it's a bit gutting listening to all you guys tasting these amazing wines, and I'm here with my coffee, but really interesting chat. I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, when particularly looking at the Pinot Noir, how important still is the influence of Burgundy towards the expression you're aiming for? Or do you now are you just looking for an expression that is Geelong and Bannockburn? How important is that influence as an ongoing thing?
Good question. I'm fascinated with Burgundy. I was supposed to be going there later this year, and so as things have this year, plans change. But I think that Australia, again, 20 years ago, people would probably, with a straight face, say that they were claiming, would say that they were trying to make Burgundy. I don't think you'd find very many people that would be trying to make Burgundy per se today. Like, you're trying to make Geelong, we're trying to make Bannockburn. We don't even buy fruit. So, I mean, we've got this limitation, but also this strength that what happens within our fence line is all that we really need to worry about. And so very much what we are thinking about is our site, and that is in Geelong, and that's what it's going to be. And so I was at a tasting, last year. Someone put on it was 15 Burgundies and one Australian Pinot that they said was a very good, sort of indication that Australian Pinot is challenging Burgundy. And so they said, and they didn't know, I was working at Bannockburn. It was a by far wine that they put into the mix. And within, sort of 20 seconds, I'd seen this by far wine. I saw, it was confusing because that sort of looks like ours, doesn't it? But it's not. And then, so I don't know what that is, but it was very obvious straight away that there's this savoury density to the wine that Burgundy has, that doesn't do. Likewise, Mornington Peninsula and Yarra Valley don't do what we do either. It's cleaner and brighter and more pure on the Mornington Peninsula. Yarra Valley is quite a disparate, sort of range of growing conditions. But we're fairly Nick Cave in the music analogy. It is quite savoury. It is quite on that wavelength.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't wish to change it. You go to a place and you're curious as to what your winemaking technique might yield, but you don't try and push something upon it. We're doing different things out there every year, but we're not trying to become Burgundy, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Thanks, but I think one of the things I was thinking of, because I know that Gary Farr has been heavily influenced by Dujac with his winemaking techniques and whole bunch, etc. So I think there was sort of an element of that, and they're wines that I know fairly well. Have you continued the whole bunch technique? You're probably about to talk about this with the Pinot, or do you sort of stray off that?
I've worked all the way around the world, and I've got a winemaking technique that I have faith in. I do use whole bunches, but it's not prescriptive, and every year it changes. But it's mostly geared towards respecting the site. I'm much more fascinated with viticulture, which is, I haven't even mentioned a single character that I can discern in the wine, which is some indication of the world that I live in, and I'm probably the least suitable person for a tasting like this, because I just don't live in the wine world per se. I live in the wine making world, but we're really focused upon the viticulture out there. That's what sort of gets us thinking, and then the winemaking is finishing that process that we've started, or someone, Stuart Cooper started in 1974, started the winemaking that we're going to make in this coming harvest. That you can't get away from that fact, and so the viticulture is really the principal thing. We do use whole bunch in a respectful way, just like we use new oak in a respectful way, and so I like what it brings, but I don't overdo it.
Great.
Yeah,
thanks, Matt.
very good.
Matt, we've got a great question come in from Brendan. He's basically asked, when did you come to the point in your life where you wanted to run a winery? Was it always going to be a kind of career life choice, or was it a kind of conscious decision and career shift?
It was not, well, I guess it was a shift on some level. I went and did engineering after high school, and then was working in a wine shop, and came to love wine, and then chose winemaking as the thing I would go on with. And so I hadn't really started a career before I got to winemaking. I'd started education, of course, but and so it's been my one and only career, despite the fact that if you'd asked me at 15 what I was going to do, it wouldn't have appeared in the top 100 list of likely outcomes. So it's I grew up in Sydney. I should have apologised for that at the start of the tasting, perhaps. But oh no, we're in Sydney, aren't we?
Yeah, you're right, mate. You're right.
So used to being in Victoria and apologising for not knowing anything about AFL, but no, it's been my one career, and it's been really wonderful. I travel the world. You can see the image on the screen at the moment. That's my office. And so every day we walk through these vineyards, we wonder what we can do better. The site that we're looking at behind the Pinot bottle actually is a block called it's Stewart. So to the right of that is going to be certified organic later this year. So we're doing things out there that I'm really pleased with. But it's taken me in places that if I'd even at the start of my winemaking career, would I imagine that I was having a virtual conversation with people on a Thursday evening in the year 2020? No, but it's been wonderful in tonight and every other regard too. It's been fun.
Fantastic. So
Amazing.
I'm just going to jump in for a quick second here. So Michael's asked a question, and he actually asked this to me privately. I'm not sure if you meant to do that, Michael, but I'm more than happy to expand on the question, obviously. So he's asked, because I was a little bit unclear, and I apologise for that. Structure versus character. Can you expand? He's asked. So basically, what I was saying, and I think this wine that we're on now, the Pinot, couldn't be more of a clearer example of what I'm about to talk about here. So structure versus character. The structural elements, I say, in a wine are the elements that are kind of almost are the things that you take from the vineyard. So you've got your tannin, your acidity, and your alcohol. Those are your structural elements and what I call the bones of the wine. The acidity is kind of the line through the center that holds up the middle of the tongue. The tannins are usually the frame, the outside, and the alcohol is the kind of within that. But the character of the wine is more what I would express as being, would I call this a fruit-forward wine? Would I call this a more savory, old-world wine? That's more of what I would call the character. So you can have very, very different characters with the same structure, or you can have very, very different structures within the same character. So hopefully, Michael, that answers your question for you there. So we're just going to go back to the map. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here, and Luke, I'm going to pass over to you. I'm going to go to this 3D map again, and then we're just going to have a quick look at where the Pinot Noir vineyard is. And Matt, I was gonna ask you the question about your viticultural principles. So I know for a fact that that you guys are very, very keen on. I mean, you're not necessarily dry farmed, but I know, are you certified organic? Is that correct? Am I?
We'll be in the blocks that are highlighted there, Delaterre and Serre, and the adjacent areas will all be certified organic later this year.
Yep.
And for us, that was mainly the elimination of herbicides. So we were using glyphosate for many years. We've gone away from glyphosate, but we are still using a non-organic herbicide where we had been. So we did a test experiment in organics in those blocks. And so 3 years ago, we had some false starts on silly things like, when we had some snails eating our cover crop, we threw out some inorganic snail bait, or the straw that we use as mulch had not come from an organic source. And so we fell over the first year with some silly things, but then we've been
to the
doing
finish line.
yeah, that's right. It's in sight now, and that feels really great. And we intend to roll it out to the rest of the vineyard in the next 5 years as well. It has been successful. So that damn snails, that's right. That ethic, that spirit of farming is probably a fairly common one. We want to give it to the next generation in better condition than we got it ourselves. And so you can make some quick decisions that have some big outcomes, but a lot of the time that's all around the choices that you make every week of every year, and those changes take a long time to be realized. But culturally, we're determined to move it in the right direction. We do use irrigation. That big green thing in the center of the screen there is our dam, so we catch off all of the area of the top of the screen. We're lucky enough to have a soil that seals up, and in winter that whole area up there would drain off, come through that little line of trees above Delaterre, which is a little ravine there, and gather in the dam, 100 megaliter dam that we have there. And then we would use that for irrigation. But we would use soil moisture probes to determine how much water we're going to use, so it's not just sort of prescriptive. Each block has one of those. Each block has its own plan as well. So we're very determined to drill down and get the best out of each block, and that's quality, not quantity, for sure.
Fantastic. So a quick question here from Hugh. Hugh's asked, and this is a fascinating question in regards to the wine that we're drinking, but also the Chardonnays as well, absolutely. Are the changing climate temperatures impacting the type of wines that you are making today? Because, I mean, Chardonnay and Pinot, of course, are traditionally Burgundian. I'm not saying these wines are necessarily Burgundian, but they came from Burgundy, and we're seeing some serious upheavals in that part of the world. Are you finding that there's an impact occurring for you where you are in your land?
We have a sort of anecdotal bit of evidence on that. I mean, the time frame for which this is happening is fairly long, and the impact upon us every year is fairly extreme. So you feel what just happened to you. You forget what happened 5 years ago. So, for example, 2020 was a very cool year. There was a threat of smoke, which luckily we avoided, and then along came COVID. So who knew about that one? But the sort of anecdotal thing is that our vineyard manager's wife's birthday was almost always before harvest, and she's sort of around mid-February. And our vineyard manager's birthday, which was mid-April, always was during harvest. And now it's flipped around to almost always being that his wife's birthday is during harvest, and his is free and clear. He's we've finished picking just about in time for his birthday. So that's fairly rough science, but
It's pretty loose science, but
it is, and that's it's perhaps as deep as we need to go. But I would say one of the variations, which we tend to get out there, which makes it difficult to really sort out the different influences, is that if we don't have a very wet winter, the soils are drier and they warm up faster and the season starts earlier. And that brings the whole ripening process into the hotter months of January and February. Whereas the string of seasons that we've just had for 2017, 18 and 19 and 20 now were good wet winters where the soil sodden took a long while to warm up, and then the season started on time and even a week after normal time. And that's really a step in the right direction, is when we have that season get off to an on time or late start. And one of the wines we've had tonight, 2016, is considered to be from a warmer year, and it certainly was a warm year, but almost as important, maybe more important, was that it was a dry winter and the soils dried out and the season got started very early, and so we were picking very early. So the length of the season mostly has not contracted, and so that would be the thing that you might say heat affects. If it's warmer, it ripens faster. We haven't seen too much of that, but we have seen rainfall in winter, more variable, and then soil warming up and the season starting. And so 2016 is a good example of that. 2015, likewise, actually.
Fantastic, thank you. So just a final reminder: we're going to be calling the winner of our text competition this evening. I'm just going to switch back to the main screen, if you wouldn't mind, Luke. And we're just going to make sure that everyone can get the text number here. And I'm just going to answer a question here. So Peter's just asked a quick question about food matches for the SRH and the Pinot, which I think would be, especially that SRH, I think I'd be very keen to hear a food match for SRH.
I always go for chicken for our Chardonnay. I think it's got, it's got warmth, but it's also got cleansing acidity. So I just think, something that itself, has a little bit of weight, a little bit of richness, like a roast chicken, just goes great. And so that's my go-to for our Chardonnays. The Pinot, I think it's more versatile because it's not, it's not a very singular wine. It's quite complex, and so I think, it's. I've had it luckily enough at restaurants with a whole range of different pairings, and more particularly, I would say, with Michael Glover's Pinots, which are even more complex wines, 100% whole bunch. They were dry grown. I've been lucky enough to have pork chops, says Clara. Okay. The Pinot, the Pinots that Michael made, I can remember one in particular at the Carlton Wine Room, the 2014 Stewart with duck, which is a fairly classic combination, a herb crusted duck. It was sensational. So, I think the more complex the dish, perhaps the better for the Pinot.
You've literally taken the words out of my mouth, mate. Honestly, that for me, duck would be like Chinese style duck with like Chinese 5-spice crust would be absolutely mentally good with that. And I would say absolutely.
It was, Michael's Pinot was out of control.
So sweet and sour with the Pinot, absolutely, yes. So thank you very much for that, Matt. So now, Luke, I'm going to throw over you, mate. And we're going to have we got everyone's
Sorry, Mark. Just before we launch into the wheel of wine, we had one more question come in about looking into the future. We've already touched on climate change. Are you looking at any other varietals, Matt? Moving into the future in terms of planting.
We've spent quite a lot of time thinking about that. Below the SRH block is a new block of Gamay that will come online this year, so we're excited about that. We've also got some land that we could plant. We've been kicking around some ideas. What I have found is that a lot of the varieties that are being introduced to Australia and available at the nurseries are more suitable to climates like McLaren Vale and the Riverina, the Riverlands, and warmer climates. So all of those, Italian, Spanish varietals are not that suitable to us. Our season is not warm enough or long enough to ripen a lot of the things that are sort of in vogue at the moment. So we keep an eye on it. We will plant something, I'm sure, but we just haven't got around to choosing beyond Gamay what that might be.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think that's incredibly indicative of the climate that you've been telling us about this whole evening. That's interesting that Tempranillo wouldn't that you think it wouldn't quite get the level of complexity that you're looking for. Yeah. I know I'll have to do a shout out, of course, to your Riesling that you make, which is, I know we don't have it here. It is outstanding. If you can get your hands on some of that, it is brilliant. It's absolutely beautiful. So Riesling's one that they are already doing that is absolutely fantastic. So now, Luke, I'm going to pass across to you, mates, and we're going to do the favourite wine of the night. Very keen to see people's feedback on this.
Brilliant. We're up.
We're going.
It's Stuart.
Stuart.
Fantastic. Well done, Stuart. I know there was a few of you enjoying the tasting this evening, so I'm sure it'll be enjoyed with the family.
Fantastic. Congratulations, Stuart. And thank you, everyone, for giving us your feedback. We really, really do value it. And it makes us, it gets us better at what we're doing here. We hope you enjoyed this evening. I'd just like to say thank you to our, we're going to start furthest first. We're going to thank you to our UK correspondent, Mr. Alistair Cooper.
Thank you. And yeah, sorry I didn't have the wines, but Matt, that was really, really interesting. And it was great, actually, at the end. That was my question about looking towards the future. And it's I was very pleased to hear you say Gamay, because it's one of my favourite grape varieties that I'd love to see more of in Australia. But thanks so much for all your wonderful insight.
Oh, thanks, Alistair.
Thank you to Matt, obviously. Thank you so much for your insight to your winery, to your special place that you have there. Thank you for all that information. We really value it. Thank you, Luke, for helping me host this evening. And thank you to all of our guests this evening for coming along. I hope you enjoyed this evening. And we're just going to, I'll just put up on screen here now. We've got a couple more coming up. We're doing this every week for the next few weeks. Oops, sorry, I've gone too far there. Every week for the next few weeks. So Yangarra next week. We're doing an Independence Day American tasting the week after, and we've got Steve Pannell 2 weeks after that. So if anyone's interested, all the wines, if you'd like to see them, are online. Feel free to talk to anyone.
And Mark, just if I can jump in there, if you are in Sydney, we've got a couple of real life in-person tastings on the schedule.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Face to face.
Times are changing.
So yeah, face-to-face tastings. Luke and myself will of course be hosting them as per usual. Looking very, very forward to seeing people up close and personal again. Not too close, obviously. And we'll be going all around the country to do them as well. So hope you can join us. So thank you everyone for coming along. We've kept it to an hour. Fantastic. 7:30 on the dot. Thank you everyone. And great to see you as always. And hopefully we'll see you another one soon.